sister always stole every man I dated, but this time I introduced her to one who made her regret it forever. Growing up, my sister was the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect smile, perfect everything. I was the backup daughter, the one who tried too hard and never quite measured up. But nowhere was this more obvious than with men. It started in high school. I'd bring a guy home, and within a week, my sister would have him wrapped around her finger. She had this way of tilting her head when she laughed, touching their arm just so, making them feel like they were the only person in the room. My boyfriends would start finding excuses to come over when I wasn't home. Then came the inevitable breakup text. Sorry, but I think we're better as friends. The first time was Mark, a sweet boy from my chemistry class. We'd been studying together for weeks, and I thought he actually liked me for my mind. Then my sister waltzed into the kitchen while we were doing homework, wearing tiny shorts and a tank top. She asked him about football, batting her eyelashes like she actually cared about sports. Within days, Mark was asking if my sister would be home when he came over to study. The second time, I confronted her. She just laughed. It's not my fault they prefer me, she said, examining her nails like we were discussing the weather. Maybe you should try harder. But I was trying. I was trying desperately. I bought new clothes, changed my hair, practiced conversations in the mirror. Nothing worked. Next to my sister, I felt invisible. College was worse. My roommate walked in on my sister making out with my boyfriend of 6 months in my own dorm room. She'd driven 3 hours just to visit me, or so I thought. When I confronted her, she shrugged. You weren't even that into him anyway, she said, like she was doing me a favor. Besides, he said you two barely even talked anymore. I wanted to scream that we barely talked because I was working 2 jobs to pay for school while she got everything handed to her. But what was the point? She'd already won. The pattern continued through college. Brian, the pre-med student who used to quiz me on anatomy, gone after one dinner with my family. James, the philosophy major who'd stay up all night discussing existentialism. My sister suddenly developed a passion for Sartre. Each loss chipped away at something fundamental inside me. I started believing there was something fundamentally wrong with me, some invisible flaw that made men prefer my sister the moment they saw her. I went to therapy, but how do you explain that your sister is beautiful and charming, and that apparently that's all that matters? By the time I turned 25, I'd stopped bringing men around the family entirely. But my sister had other methods. She'd become a social media detective, checking my posts, figuring out where I was going on dates. She'd show up at restaurants, coffee shops, even movie theaters, always looking effortlessly stunning in something that made me feel overdressed or underdressed or just wrong. She never seemed to actually want these men long term. She'd date them just long enough to prove she could steal them, then move on to her next conquest. I'd watch my ex-boyfriends go through the same cycle. First, the intoxication of being chosen by her. Then the confusion when she started pulling away. Finally, the devastation when she inevitably dumped them. But by then, it was too late for me and them. The trust was broken. Even if they wanted to come back, I couldn't take them. How do you rebuild a relationship with someone who left you for your sister? Mom always defended her. Your sister can't help being attractive, she'd say when I complained. Maybe you need to work on your confidence instead of blaming her for your problems. She has a gift for making people comfortable. You could learn from her. What Mom didn't see was the calculation behind my sister's charm. The way she'd research my boyfriends beforehand, finding out their interests, their insecurities, their dreams. She'd become their perfect woman, reflecting back exactly what they wanted to see. It wasn't natural charisma, it was predatory. Dad stayed silent during these conversations, probably relieved he didn't have to deal with girl drama. He'd just retreat to his study with a beer whenever these discussions started, leaving me to defend myself against accusations that I was jealous, bitter, unable to be happy for my sister's success. Success. That's what they called it when she destroyed my relationships. Success. I tried everything to outsmart her. I dated men from different social circles, thinking she wouldn't be interested in guys from my book club or hiking group, but she'd reinvent herself for anyone. When I dated Trevor, who was obsessed with environmental conservation, she suddenly became passionate about saving the whales. When I brought home Ethan, a quiet accountant who collected vintage vinyl records, she discovered a deep appreciation for obscure jazz. She had this supernatural ability to become exactly what any man wanted. If they liked quiet bookish types, she'd show up with glasses and a novel. If they preferred party girls, she'd arrive with stories about her wild adventures that may or may not have been true. She was like a shapeshifter, adapting her personality to match their desires. The worst part was watching my relationships deteriorate in real time. I'd see the exact moment my boyfriend's attention shifted from me to her. The way their eyes would light up when she entered a room, how they'd start asking casual questions about her interests, her schedule, whether she was seeing anyone. I became hypervigilant, analyzing every interaction, looking for signs of defection. It made me paranoid, clingy, the very things that would drive them away even faster. My sister created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Her presence made me so anxious and insecure that I'd sabotage my own relationships before she even had to lift a finger. The breaking point came at my cousin's wedding. I'd been seeing Tyler for 3 months, the longest relationship I'd managed to maintain while still having contact with my family. He was different, kind, funny, actually interested in my thoughts and dreams about opening a bookstore someday. We'd talk for hours about literature, travel, our plans for the future. For once, I thought I'd found someone my sister couldn't touch. Tyler wasn't her usual type. He was more thoughtful than flashy, more interested in deep conversations than surface charm. He'd never shown any interest in my sister during the few times he'd met her at family gatherings. I thought maybe finally, I'd found someone who could see through her act. I should have known better. She showed up to the wedding reception in a red dress that stopped traffic. I watched her scan the room like a predator surveying prey, her eyes moving from person to person until they landed on Tyler. I saw the exact moment she decided to make him her next target. The way her expression shifted from casual interest to focused determination. She'd done her homework, as always. Somehow, in the week since I'd mentioned Tyler would be my date, she'd discovered his passion for environmental science and sustainable living. At the reception, she cornered him by the bar with stories about her fictional volunteer work with endangered species and her sudden interest in renewable energy. I watched from across the room as she worked her magic. The head tilt, the arm touch, the brilliant smile, the way she made him feel like the most interesting person at the wedding while completely ignoring the other single men who were obviously interested in her. By the end of the night, Tyler was getting her drinks while I stood alone by the wedding cake, watching my relationship crumble in real time. That night, Tyler broke up with me via text. Found someone more compatible. The message read, "Hope you understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that no matter what I did, no matter how carefully I chose, no matter how different I thought someone was, my sister would always win. Because she didn't play fair. She played to win. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, something cold and determined settling in my chest. My sister had taken everything from me my entire life. My parents' attention when she was born and suddenly became the baby everyone cooed over. My achievements overshadowed by her effortless perfection. My confidence eroded by years of coming in second. Every relationship I'd ever tried to build, destroyed for her entertainment. Tyler wasn't just another boyfriend. I genuinely cared about him. We'd talked about meeting each other's families, about planning a trip to Europe together. For the first time in years, I'd felt like someone actually saw me for who I was, not as the lesser version of my sister, and she'd destroyed that just because she could. It was time she learned what it felt like to be the one who lost everything. I spent 3 weeks planning my revenge. I needed someone special. Someone who could match my sister's manipulation with his own. Someone who would make her feel what I'd felt all these years. The helplessness of watching something precious slip away despite your best efforts. But where would I find someone like that? My sister was a master manipulator. Someone who'd been perfecting her craft since childhood. I needed someone even better at the game than she was. That's when I met him at a coffee shop downtown. I'd been sitting alone, scrolling through job listings and trying to figure out how to rebuild my life once again, when he slid into the seat across from me. Tall, dark hair, eyes that seemed to see right through you. He had this confident way of moving, like he owned every room he entered. "Sorry, but you looked like you needed someone to talk to," he said, gesturing to my obvious frustration. "Rough day?" Something about his tone made me look up. There was an intelligence in his eyes, a sharpness that reminded me of my sister when she was hunting. But instead of feeling threatened, I felt intrigued. Maybe it was because, for once, that predatory intelligence wasn't directed at something I cared about. He introduced himself as Adrian. We talked for hours, and I found myself telling him things I'd never told anyone. About the patterns in my family, about feeling invisible, about the systematic destruction of every relationship I'd ever attempted. Adrian listened with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly unnerving. He asked probing questions, seemed genuinely interested in the psychology behind my sister's behavior. "Your sister sounds like a textbook narcissist," he said finally, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Always needs to be the center of attention, especially if it means taking something away from someone else. I bet she doesn't even really want these men. She just wants to prove she can have them." "Exactly," I said, surprised by how accurately he'd assessed her after just one conversation. "But how do you deal with someone like that?" Adrian smiled, and something in that smile made my pulse quicken. There was a darkness there, a hint of something dangerous that should have warned me off. Instead, I found myself leaning closer. "You fight fire with fire," he said. "Give her a taste of her own medicine." We spent the next hour discussing strategy. Adrian seemed to understand manipulative people on an almost scientific level. He talked about psychological vulnerabilities, about how to exploit someone's need for validation, about the difference between love and obsession. I should have been disturbed by how easily he discussed these tactics. Instead, I felt like I'd finally found someone who understood the game my sister had been playing all these years. Someone who could beat her at it. 2 days later, I invited my sister to lunch. We met at her favorite bistro, the one where she liked to be seen by important people. She spent the first 20 minutes talking about Tyler, how sweet he was but ultimately not sophisticated enough for her. She'd already moved on, of course. The conquest was complete, and she was bored. "Actually," I said when she finally paused for breath, "I have someone I want you to meet. I think you'd really like him." Her eyes lit up with that familiar predatory gleam. "Oh? Tell me about him." I described Adrian carefully, highlighting all the qualities that would appeal to her. Successful businessman, sophisticated, well-traveled, confident to the point of arrogance. The kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted. I watched her interest sharpen with each detail. "He's incredibly charming," I added, very confident. "Actually, I think he might be out of your league." That did it. My sister's competitive nature couldn't resist a challenge. Her spine straightened and I saw that familiar look of determination cross her face. The same look she'd had before targeting every boyfriend I'd ever brought home. She practically demanded I introduce them, making me promise to set up a meeting as soon as possible. I agreed, trying to hide my satisfaction behind sisterly enthusiasm. 3 days later, we met at an upscale wine bar downtown. Adrian arrived exactly on time, looking devastating in a perfectly tailored suit. My sister had spent hours getting ready, and she looked stunning as always. But for once, I felt like I had the upper hand. Adrian was everything I'd promised and more. Charming, intelligent, attentive. He focused on my sister like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. But I caught something in his eyes that my sister missed, probably because she'd never been on the receiving end of calculation before. A coldness, a measurement, an assessment of weaknesses and pressure points. Within minutes, she was completely hooked. He complimented her intelligence, her beauty, her insights on topics she knew nothing about, but he did it differently than her usual victims. There was a subtle edge to his attention, a sense that he was the one in control of the conversation. He'd done his research just like she always did. He mentioned art galleries she'd posted about on Instagram, restaurants she'd checked into on social media, but unlike her previous conquests, who seemed grateful for her attention, Adrian acted like her interest in him was expected, deserved. I excused myself after an hour, claiming work obligations. As I left, I saw my sister lean closer to Adrian, her hand on his arm in that practiced gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. She thought she was reeling him in. She had no idea she was walking into a trap far more sophisticated than any she'd ever set. Over the next few weeks, I watched my sister fall harder than I'd ever seen her fall for anyone. Adrian was a master manipulator, even better than she was. He'd shower her with attention one day, taking her to expensive restaurants and exclusive events, then become mysteriously unavailable the next. He'd send her elaborate bouquets of flowers followed by days of radio silence. He complimented her constantly, but in ways that subtly undermined her confidence. He'd tell her she was beautiful, then mention how much better she looked in certain colors. He'd praise her intelligence, then explain complex topics to her like she was a child. For the first time in her life, my sister was the one chasing. She'd call me constantly, analyzing every text Adrian sent, every interaction they had. She'd screenshot his messages and ask me to help interpret them, looking for hidden meanings and reassurances. "He's different," she'd say, pacing around my apartment like a caged animal. "I can't figure him out. Usually guys are so easy to read, but he's like a puzzle. One minute he's telling me I'm perfect, the next he's canceling our plans to handle some mysterious business emergency." I'd nod sympathetically while secretly enjoying her confusion. She was finally experiencing what it felt like to be uncertain, to second-guess herself, to feel like she wasn't enough. But Adrian's manipulation went deeper than simple mind games. He started isolating her from her friends, claiming they were jealous of their relationship and didn't want to see her happy. He'd make subtle comments about how they weren't sophisticated enough for her, how she deserved better than their petty drama. My sister, who had always been popular and social, found herself spending more and more time alone, waiting for Adrian's calls. Her friends stopped inviting her out because she'd cancel at the last minute whenever Adrian wanted to see her. She'd lost the support system that had always validated her sense of superiority. He'd make plans with her, elaborate dates that she'd spend days preparing for, then cancel at the last minute with mysterious excuses. Business emergencies, family obligations, sudden trips out of town. She'd be left sitting in expensive restaurants alone or dressed up with nowhere to go. When she'd complain, he'd turn it around on her, make her feel like she was being unreasonable, too demanding, not understanding enough of his important work. He'd apologize with such apparent sincerity that she'd end up apologizing to him for bringing it up. He criticized her appearance in subtle ways that made her question herself. She started changing her hair, her makeup, her entire wardrobe, trying to figure out what would please him. The sister who had always been effortlessly confident became someone who checked herself obsessively in every mirror, constantly seeking his approval. Within 2 months, my confident, self-assured sister had become a shadow of herself. She'd lost weight from stress and anxiety, started checking her phone obsessively every few minutes, and began changing everything about herself to try to please him. She stopped talking about other men entirely, something that had never happened before. Usually, she'd maintain a roster of backup options, keeping other men interested while she played her games, but Adrian demanded her complete attention, and she gave it willingly. I should have felt victorious. This was exactly what I'd wanted, wasn't it? To see her experience the powerlessness I'd felt all those years, to watch her finally lose something she couldn't steal back. But as I watched her spiral, something uncomfortable twisted in my stomach. The sister I'd known, for all her faults, had been strong. Predatory, yes, but confident and self-possessed. This broken, desperate woman was someone I barely recognized. The worst part was how she'd started treating other people. The casual cruelty that had once been directed at me was now turned inward. She'd tear apart her own appearance, her own intelligence, her own worth. Adrian had convinced her that she was lucky to have his attention, that she needed to work to deserve it. She started showing up at my apartment at random hours, needing to talk through every interaction with Adrian. She'd replay conversations obsessively, looking for signs that he was losing interest or evidence that he really cared. I found myself in the strange position of comforting the same sister who had tormented me for years. Part of me enjoyed seeing her vulnerable, but a larger part was disturbed by the transformation. This wasn't justice. This was destruction. The breaking point came when she showed up at my apartment at midnight, sobbing hysterically. Her makeup was smeared, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold her phone. "I think he's seeing someone else," she whispered, collapsing onto my couch. I found messages on his phone when he was in the shower. He said they didn't mean anything, that I was being paranoid and insecure. But the things he said to her, the way he talked about her. She pulled up screenshots on her phone, showing me texts between Adrian and some woman named Veronica. Messages that were flirtatious, intimate, planning secret meetings. When my sister had confronted him, he'd gaslighted her completely. "You're being paranoid," he'd told her. "These are just business contacts. You're seeing things that aren't there because you're insecure. Maybe if you trusted me more, our relationship would be stronger. She'd believed him, or tried to. But the evidence was right there on his phone, and she'd seen it with her own eyes. He says he loves me, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. But then he disappears for days. He makes me feel like I'm going crazy, like everything wrong in our relationship is my fault. I've never felt like this before. I don't know how to make him happy. I knew that feeling intimately. I'd felt it with every relationship she'd destroyed. That sense of trying desperately to be enough for someone who was already looking elsewhere. But seeing it reflected in her eyes, I realized how cruel it truly was. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, curled up on my couch in expensive clothes that now seemed to overwhelm her shrinking frame. Gone was the predatory confidence, the casual cruelty. In her place was someone broken, desperate, clinging to a relationship that was destroying her piece by piece. I want to leave him, she said suddenly, but I can't. When he's good to me, it's like nothing I've ever experienced. He makes me feel special, chosen. And when he pulls away, I just want to try harder to get that feeling back. It was textbook trauma bonding, the same psychological manipulation that kept abuse victims trapped in destructive cycles. Adrian had created an addiction to his approval, making her dependent on his validation for her sense of self-worth. Over the next week, things got progressively worse. My sister started calling in sick to work, spending entire days in bed waiting for Adrian's texts. She'd drive by his apartment at night, trying to see if he was there, or if there were signs of another woman. She'd become everything she'd once mocked in other women: desperate, obsessive, unable to function without constant reassurance. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd turned her victims into the same kind of anxious, clingy partners she was now becoming herself. Her friends had given up trying to reach her. Her work performance was suffering. She'd lost interest in everything that had once brought her joy, focusing entirely on decoding Adrian's moods and trying to anticipate his needs. I tried to talk to her, to suggest she should leave him, but she was in too deep. Adrian had systematically destroyed her self-worth, convincing her that she was lucky to have him, that no one else would ever want her the way he did. "You don't understand," she'd say when I suggested she deserved better treatment. "He's not like other men. When things are good between us, they're perfect. He sees parts of me that no one else has ever seen. I just need to figure out how to be what he needs." It was heartbreaking to watch. This was my sister, the woman who had effortlessly stolen every man I'd ever cared about, reduced to begging for scraps of attention from someone who clearly didn't respect her. Then came the night that changed everything. My sister called me at 3 a.m., her voice so distorted by hysteria that I could barely understand her. She'd gone to Adrian's apartment, using the key he'd given her weeks ago as a symbol of trust, and found him with another woman. Not just any woman, but Veronica, the one from the text messages. And not just together, but clearly in an established relationship. There were photos of them on his refrigerator, her clothes in his closet, signs of a life they'd been building while he was playing games with my sister. I drove to Adrian's building and found my sister sitting on the curb, still in her pajamas and slippers. She was staring at nothing, completely catatonic. When she heard my car, she looked up with eyes that held no recognition, no awareness of where she was or how she'd gotten there. "He planned this," she said when she finally spoke, her voice completely flat. "The whole thing. He wanted me to find them together. He wanted me to know it was all a game." He was laughing when I walked in. They both were. I helped her into my car, my mind racing. This had gone far beyond what I had intended. What had started as revenge had become something darker, more twisted than anything my sister had ever done to her victims. When we got back to my apartment, she curled up on my couch like a child, pulling a throw blanket over her head. For hours, she didn't speak, didn't move, didn't respond to my attempts to comfort her. When she finally emerged, her voice was hollow, stripped of all emotion. "I know why you did this," she said quietly, not looking at me. "I know I deserve it. I've been horrible to you your entire life. I stole your boyfriends, your moments, your confidence. I did it because I could, because it made me feel powerful. And now you've shown me what it feels like to be powerless." She looked at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger or resentment, but recognition, understanding. "He's not really your friend, is he? You found him specifically for this, to teach me a lesson." I wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. She was right, and we both knew it. I'd orchestrated her destruction as carefully as she'd once orchestrated mine. "You were right to hate me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I destroyed every relationship you ever had just for fun. I never thought about how it felt for you. I never cared. I turned it into a game, and I always made sure I won." She sat up straighter, and for a moment I saw a flash of the old her, the confident woman who had terrorized my dating life for years. But this wasn't a game, was it? This was calculated revenge. You didn't just want to beat me at my own game. You wanted to destroy me completely. We sat in silence as the sun came up, both of us processing what had happened. I thought I'd feel satisfied, vindicated. Instead, I felt empty. My sister was broken, but it didn't fix what she'd done to me. It didn't give me back the years of confidence she'd stolen or the relationships she'd ruined. More than that, I'd become something I didn't recognize. Someone capable of orchestrating psychological torture, of watching another person's destruction and calling it justice. That morning, I called Adrian. I told him it was over, that he needed to leave my sister alone completely. He laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You created this situation," he said, his voice cold and amused. "You brought her to me. You told me exactly how to hurt her. What did you think would happen?" I realized then that I'd become just as cruel as my sister had ever been. Worse, maybe, because I'd done it deliberately, with full knowledge of the pain it would cause. She'd hurt people out of thoughtlessness and narcissism. I'd hurt her out of pure malice. My sister moved in with me temporarily, too shaken to be alone in her apartment. For weeks, she barely left my spare bedroom. She'd wake up crying from nightmares about Adrian, spend hours staring at her phone waiting for messages that never came, jump at every unexpected sound. Adrian had done more than break her heart. He'd broken something fundamental in her sense of self, her ability to trust her own perceptions. She'd second-guess every thought, every feeling, wondering if she was being paranoid or unreasonable. Slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild our relationship. Not the competitive, toxic dynamic we'd grown up with, but something new, something honest. She told me about the pressure she'd felt growing up, how stealing my boyfriends had been her way of proving her worth, how she'd never learned to connect with people authentically because she'd always relied on manipulation and competition. Our parents had pit us against each other from the beginning, she said one afternoon as we sat in my kitchen drinking coffee. They'd praise me for being pretty and charming, but only in comparison to you. Like my value came from being better than my sister, instead of being good enough on my own. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it helped me understand it. She'd been taught that love was conditional, something you had to earn by being superior to everyone else. Taking my boyfriends hadn't been about wanting them specifically. It had been about proving she was still the favorite, still worthy of attention. I told her about the years of therapy, the confidence issues, the way I'd started believing I wasn't worthy of love, how her actions had shaped my entire understanding of relationships, making me believe that anyone who chose me was settling for second best. We talked about our parents, about the toxic family dynamics that had created our destructive relationship, how they'd encouraged competition instead of collaboration, comparison instead of support. It took months, but we started to heal. My sister began seeing a therapist who specialized in narcissistic personality patterns, working through the behaviors that had defined her life. She had to learn how to form genuine connections with people, how to be vulnerable without feeling weak. I worked on forgiveness, on understanding that her cruelty had come from her own deep insecurities and learned behaviors. It didn't make what she'd done okay, but it helped me see her as human rather than a monster. The process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, arguments, moments when old patterns would resurface. But gradually, we built something neither of us had ever had before. A real relationship based on honesty instead of competition. 2 years later, my sister started dating again. But this time was different. She chose a man who saw through her attempts at manipulation and called her out on them. Someone who loved her for who she really was, not the perfect image she'd learned to project. Thomas was nothing like the men she'd targeted before. He was kind, but not naive, strong enough to stand up to her when she slipped into old patterns. When she tried to change herself to please him, he'd gently remind her that he'd fallen for the real her, flaws and all. Their relationship wasn't easy. My sister had to unlearn decades of manipulative behavior, had to practice being authentic when authenticity felt dangerous. But Thomas was patient, and more importantly, he was consistent. He didn't play games or use emotional manipulation. He just loved her steadily, honestly. Watching them together, I realized what I'd been missing in my own relationships. I'd been so focused on keeping men away from my sister that I'd never learned how to truly connect with them myself. I'd been guarded, always waiting for betrayal, never fully trusting anyone. I started dating again too, but with a different approach. Instead of hiding my relationships or worrying about my sister's interference, I focused on building genuine connections. I learned to be vulnerable, to trust, to communicate my needs clearly. The first man I dated seriously after everything was Daniel, a teacher who shared my love of books and quiet evenings. When I introduced him to my sister, I watched carefully for signs of her old behavior. But instead of flirtation or competition, I saw genuine happiness for me. She complimented him sincerely, asked thoughtful questions about his work, and then excused herself early to give us time alone. It was the first time she'd ever voluntarily stepped back from one of my relationships. Now I'm 30, working as a librarian and genuinely happy for the first time in my adult life. My sister and I have dinner every Sunday, sharing stories about our weeks and supporting each other through the normal ups and downs of life. She's married to Thomas now, and they're expecting their first child. She's nervous about becoming a parent, worried about repeating the toxic patterns we grew up with, but I think she'll be different. She's learned to recognize her own destructive impulses and has the tools to choose better. I'm single by choice, focusing on my career and my own growth. I've learned that revenge doesn't heal old wounds. It just creates new ones, deeper and more complicated than the original injuries. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Adrian and wonder how many other women he's destroyed. I think about the monster I helped create when I decided to fight fire with fire, when I chose cruelty over compassion. My sister got her lesson, but so did I. Sometimes the price of revenge is losing yourself in the process, becoming the very thing you once hated. Some victories cost too much to ever feel like winning.